Okay, welcome everybody to another exciting MicroGiants meeting. Happy to have you all here. Thank you very much. We are recording today from the Collaborative Networks studio in Colton, California. And thank you very much, Edgar, for allowing us to use your studio. And as you kind of go through the process of building this and making this better and better and more professional, we appreciate being able to be a little bit of a part of that. Okay, so for today, we're going to cover a subject that is the most important subject in marketing, and that is marketing positioning and marketing emplacement. A lot of you have heard about marketing positioning either because we've talked about it or because it's a term that has become more popular in the last 5 or 10 years. That was really put together by a couple of gentlemen by the names of Trout and Reis, who were pretty famous, and they wrote several books on this subject. Despite the fact that they wrote books and they had done an awful lot of work with major companies, it didn't really take hold for some time. But I'd say in the last 5 or 10 years, that's something that has become more widely known and is now taught academically in some universities. We have found that and positioning is, we'll define it quickly, your positioning is sort of the battle or placement of your message or brand to try to sort of capture the mind and the inspiration and the imagination of the customer. And so it's very much of a mental thing. It's something that you do in order to be able to become top of mind, first of mind. And if you can achieve that, then you end up to be somebody like Starbucks, where we all have an impression of what Starbucks is about, or our Mercedes-Benz, or any of our famous brands. We have a pretty good idea of what that is simply by saying the brand or the name. But there's another piece to that for small businesses, and that's called emplacement or marketing emplacement. And that's really a term that we really had to develop to describe niches. So when we talk about small businesses needing to develop a niche, we're talking about a very small or a micro niche that exists in an existing market, or it may be a brand new market. And so it's really important to have serious discussions about both of these regarding your business, whether you're starting something really new, or whether or not you're trying to refine your products, or you're trying to make decisions about product extensions and going into new markets, et cetera. It really governs everything that happens in marketing. When you get this thing wrapped up, you like to have a positioning statement, a marketing and placement statement to help your company understand who you are, where you're going, and what your strategy is. But I also want to say up front that if you can't find this sort of crack in the market for your business, or you can't redefine it so that people can understand it, or it exists in a geographic area, et cetera, it makes business very much harder. And you end up, instead of being a market-driven company, you end up being a sales-driven company. So the better job you can do on developing your positioning, the better your company will succeed. And the easier it is to, quote, sell what you're trying to sell to customers. And the reason is that if you really have what customers want, my old mentor said to me, Ron, if you do it right, your customers will beat a path to your door. You won't have to sell or market anything. And I found that to be true over the years in several product developments and in opening 7 stores over a period of time, some in the right place, some in the wrong place. You kind of learn that that's really true. Now, when you can have people beat a path to your door and break down your door, and if they have to, they'll steal what you have. If you can't supply what it is that they really want, and we've seen some similar circumstances with the shortages that we've had recently. But when you achieve that, that is a delight to behold. to be able to have a business where everybody wants what you sell is just wonderful. And it also creates opportunities to understand, to quick start your business. It saves a lot of money in marketing costs and advertising and a lot of wasted time and effort. So positioning becomes a very, very important thing. So today I want to follow off from where we left from our last meeting. And so I will share my screen here. And okay, we're gonna continue on just a little bit. I want to repeat one or two things just to kind of set this up because they're important as well. So we've defined positioning and we've defined emplacement. And now I want to talk a little bit about market cracks. And these are sort of the same thing in a way, because the better your positioning within your market niche is, the better you're going to be able to be successful in all things having to do with marketing. So first, the easy things to understand are that markets are always broken down into a general industry, and then they're broken into geographic areas. Then within that, you have specializations, companies that specialize in doing something that's sort of a little off from the norm. Then there is another classification called specification and stickiness. That is, what it does is it really defines the opportunity to keep people with your business because you say have products that fit together and then nobody else's products fit with yours, or they're hard to let go of, having to do with, say, automatic renewals, for instance, where customers just let it happen, or they forget that they have an automatic renewal, say on a subscription. That's what specification stickiness is. And also many times a company will specify a specific product as a replacement part, et cetera. So that's another example. Then distribution control. Distribution's really been in the news, and you can see that over the last 30 years, we might have thought the distribution was almost invisible. And but in fact, when it breaks down, you can tell it's not invisible. It's very much a part of the whole marketing, the whole marketing effort, and that is getting products to the customers so that they can enjoy them and use them. And so when the distribution control breaks down, we typically, right now it's about not having enough truckers, not being able to get containers off of ships. But it also has to do with artificial barriers that can be in the distribution channel. One of the artificial barriers has been, say, unions who have controlled the amount of containers that can come off of a ship. That has been a problem before. Years ago, we had the entire trucking industry unionized, and we had regulation, and things were way different in those days, and you had to pay by the hundredweight. You paid for 100 pounds, whether you shipped 5 pounds or 100 pounds. And if you shipped 105 pounds, you paid the 200-pound weight. Those were union kinds of rules that companies adopted to make sure that they could control their costs and make a lot more money. Strangely enough, in those days, the shipping wasn't nearly as good as it is today. That was deregulated years ago, and as a result, the trucking industry and our deliveries have gotten much better. And of course, we all know what the Amazon effect has done to distribution. But one of those artificial things that does come up and happen is that you can have the retail segment prohibit you from participating in the retail segment, store by store, company by company. And what happens there is that large retailers will have X amount of space, and everybody wants to be, say, in a grocery store, but because you don't have a certain, or you might be competing, or you're very small, or you have a brand new product that's not proven, you'll have to try and find a way to get on the shelf, and they call that slotting. In other words, you have to pay for the space that you're going to put your product on, and then of course they buy your product and you have to deliver it. Sometimes you have to stock it, but for the most part, brand new companies can't even find an opportunity to sell to large stores because you can't even get into the distribution channel. You might not get a distributor to even carry your product and carry it into the retailer. And until recently, retailers wouldn't even have a conversation with somebody who just walked in with a product. Now, the market has changed. We talked a little bit about this last week with John Paul, and that is that now everybody wants locally made, locally sourced, sustainable products, which has a certain amount of locality built into that. And as a result, they're trying to bring in more different products. And we've had a lot more options to be able to get into retail now. And at the same time, the distribution, because of Amazon and other online, has changed dramatically with sort of that beefed up last mile trucking business, being able to bring products to your door in like as little as one day, sometimes even the same day. So that's distribution, and that can get a little bit complicated for each different industry. The referral and symbiotic is as it basically states, is that you're dealing with a set of products, and buying another product has some symbiotic opportunities there, and you buy it because one fits with the other one in some fashion. And of course, a referral can happen from one company to another. You don't know where to go. And so you'll take a referral because you can't find somebody to take care of a problem. This happens a lot in services, sometimes in autos, and in home repairs and that kind of thing, where you're not really sure who to call. And then there will be this referral system behind the scenes, and they'll help you find someone that maybe they've done business with before. Authenticity has to do with whether or not people think that your brand is actually authentic. People don't want to deal with fakes. They don't want to, if the price is right, they'll buy a fake Gucci bag, but they also, they're sort of living a lie. They're trying to pretend like they can afford a Gucci bag, and maybe they can't really. And so they're willing to give up the authenticity, but anybody, if, given price, anybody would really rather have authenticity than not. Internet keyword ownership is one of those niches that's really important. We'll, at some point in the future, we'll spend a lot of time talking about this. But basically, that means that people have to find you online as well as down at the corner. And in order for them to find you, you better have a unique enough name to be able to do a search, or you better have keywords that come up at least locally in your area to get found. If you don't have that, then you need some serious thinking done in order to be able to do that. And that's really still amazingly a problem for many companies, particularly service companies, kind of old line companies that say, I don't need no stinking website. I'm looking for certain I have a new house and I'm looking for certain kinds of services, and I can't believe how hard it is to find on the internet. Of course, I don't even have a phone book. I haven't owned a phone book in maybe almost 20 years now. So if they're not on the web, they don't exist to me. They can't exist very easily if you can't figure out where their phone number is. So that's a very big deal, and requires a lot more time talking about it than what we have right now. Now, relationship, we spoke about a lot in the last meeting, and that is, as it states, the better relationship you have with your customers, the more solid your trading circumstances will be with those. So I wanted to then go through very briefly again, because I want to make sure that you kind of get this, because this is such an important topic. Basically, we've got these various concentric circles where geographic is broken down by specialization, and within specialization, you may have specification, stickiness, symbiotic situations or markets, referrals, and then authenticity, and finally the relationship right in the middle, which really holds it all. If we look at it again this way, just to kind of explain it a little bit better and in more detail than last week, basically, each one of these could be explained by the ownership of a Jaguar, and I use this an awful lot. What it means is that you buy a Jaguar and you live, say, in you're in the automotive industry, you live in Los Angeles, so there's the geographic one. Specialization is if you want it repaired, you find a place that specializes in used Jaguars. And now you've got somebody who can really take care of you. Under specification stickiness, the specialist keeps old SKEs on the lot, and so they've got access to parts, and who's really got that. And if you're dealing with, say, used Jaguar parts, and you have a ready source for those products, you're going to have a real leg up on a general automotive specialist or repair person who has to buy them through channels and may have to look for them, and now there's labor involved. And so you can see how you can really tie your customers in if you're the one who has the right parts. Under referral and symbiotic, the dealers, both used and new dealers, not so much new because they want to keep your business for a while anyway, until the warranty is out. But the dealers will know who the very best automotive people are, the best repair guys are within the Jaguar sort of world. And so that is that symbiotic one. And many times the Jaguar repair guy may not repair the engine itself, but will have a brother-in-law who is particularly good at that. And because they're different businesses, but because they work back and forth, they end up keeping this symbiotic relationship where they solve the problem for the customer and they both end up getting business. Authenticity, well, once you've gone to this guy's lot or looked at his website, you can tell that this guy is a true blue Jaguar repair guy, and you just don't have any doubt about the fact that he's going to give you the right stuff and it's going to be real, and that's what you want. That's why you're a Jaguar aficionado. And then in a relationship, you get to know these people pretty well, because Jaguars do need to be repaired a lot more than an average car, and so you can get to know them pretty well. And I had a boss who always had two Jaguars. One was for the shop and one was to drive. And he had a very close relationship with his Jaguar repair guy because he almost always had one Jaguar in for something. If not a repair, he was redoing the seats or touching up paint. There was always something that he was doing. So that's an example of a niche market, of finding a crack in the market. We don't know if this guy decided to get into this business ahead of time because he felt like there was a need, or he may have just fallen into it because he found he was, maybe he was better on working on Jaguars or had more specialized knowledge. But for whatever reason, he ended up with this specialization, and that specialization continued to create a niche in his marketplace. And these kinds of businesses can do very well because people, they know the quality, there's generally better service, the price is a little higher, and they are willing to pay for it, and therefore that image and that brand is developed specifically around that. So defining your market. You want to build a niche industry that has a geographic element. And in this particular case, we talked about the Jaguar business. It's in Southern California. there's certain distribution control because you're only going to have one or two of these particular businesses in a given region, and if you can control parts in some way or have access to parts or better knowledge of parts, you've got a little distribution control there. Authenticity in this particular case is easy to discern, and then the relationship is developed. All these things together creates that crack in the market that we continually talk about, which is, of course, the niche market. And then the issue there is, well, now how do you position yourself? And of course, when you have all of these things and they're understood, it makes it a lot easier to position. I wanted to talk just a little bit about a protective idea. And this comes from a guy who I think we all know. Warren Buffett is one of the most wealthy men in the world. I think he used to be the wealthiest, but you've had a few billionaires pop up recently on brand new businesses where they were very well niched. And now they've kind of pushed him into the top 5, I think. These are some things that he calls the Moat Strategy. And I want to briefly run through this. The network effect is a business that increases value and increasingly connects with others, such as Facebook. I believe it also includes those connections where companies have symbiotic relationships. So that's his statement. Now, Facebook was an example, but he was just using that interconnectedness as an example for the real world as well. They're difficult to leave. That's where customers really don't have an incentive to stop a service like telephone or cable service. And of course, we call that stickiness. Virtual control of a market, that's where a monopoly or a narrow market where the buyer really has very little choice. And that exists in a lot of little places all over. That specialization may be geographic in nature because you're in an isolated area. If you happen to be a tow truck driver and you are covering areas in say Nevada, 100, 200 miles in length, chances are that can only support a market of just one tow truck guy. And so you're going to call that person, and everybody up and down the road knows that person. So that person would have a virtual control of that market. Proprietary patents, licenses, or brands. And of course, Coca-Cola is famous for having a formula that's in a safe. But there's a lot of other intellectual property out there today that really can become proprietary if the Chinese don't steal it, and you can keep it proprietary. And that has to do with new knowledge, ways of building systems, et cetera. Sometimes it's actually a mechanical piece that you can actually protect. And then, of course, licenses many times do that. In England, guilds have controlled that to a very large degree. Unions, to some degree, does that today, but also industries such as dentists and optometry and law businesses have their own state boards, and they control who gets to be part of that monopoly. It's not a monopoly, but that controlled industry. Or be the low-cost producer. These are companies that have a huge cost advantage in terms of their, say, production. And if they can maintain that, of course, they have a higher sales volume. The higher sales volume allows them to create lower prices and be the low-cost producer. So that's usually a one company in each niche market. And so that advantage, allows them to become the low-cost producer. And if they can maintain their quality, they'll do well. So these are all moats, 5 barriers that Warren Buffett has actually stated that he uses. And you'll notice how similar many of these are to the little niche categories that we talked about. So you could do a lot of things and be very niche oriented. You might, anything from a hot dog vendor to a milk producer to an avocado packer, all of these different operators can become a marketplace. And then within each one of these, there are sub-markets. And that narrower market can increase your market position within that narrower market. So if in a little bit broader market, to be, say, a milk producer, you're going to sell to everybody, right? But that's a geographic issue because you have to ship it. But if you happen to be a home delivery company, now you might only have 2 or 3 competitors within a geographic area, and now that's the narrow market. Well, you'd have 3% market share of, say, a whole city's business if you're just producing milk. But if you had 3 people in the home delivery business, you may have 50% of the market or 30% of the market. And so that narrower market can increase your market position, giving you more ability to control what you do, giving you a better coverage and more money to put towards your niche. And as we will discuss in a moment, if we can, or excuse me, as we discussed last week, if you can maintain a high quality image and you can become number 1, 2, or 3, you're going to have higher margins. Those margins create money for advertising, which increases your ability to focus on your niche and really capture and own and run your own niche. Really understanding your customers helps focus. Now, if you have all kinds of customers, you have a wide market, that's hard to do. If you're in the milk market, your customers include everybody except those who don't want to drink milk. But if you're in the home delivery market, it's a totally different thing. It's a certain income level. There are some ethnic relationships to that. There are neighborhood issues, have certain kinds of neighborhoods. Families are much more prone to be part of that. You can understand your customer to a great degree if you bring your niche down. If you don't, you're going to be spending money on a broader number of customers, and you're going to have a less of an impact overall. That's why you have to narrow your niche in order to be successful. Innovating within the narrow space can differentiate you, but it also allows you to create that specialization that we talked about. If you are in a narrow space, you can focus on things that will firm up your position as opposed to defray what people think about you and your brand. You say perhaps your production capabilities, your ability even to buy products from outside is better if you have more volume in a smaller area. And of course, you're going to increase your overall value in your market crack to customers. So what are the components of value? We've been through this in detail, but we're going to just review this for this subject right now. The components of what a customer thinks value is quality, service, price, and image, brand, aesthetics, etc. And those 4 components can be measured. So if you just build a little cross table here and then go from 1 to 100 or 1 to 10 or just number that, you can actually go through and have your managers and employees just kind of go, well, let's compare the 2 or 3 or 4 products and let's see where we stand on this. It's amazing how similar it can be just in a quick sort of tablecloth, or not tablecloth, but a napkin kind of exercise of just drawing this out. So in a particular case like this that we've drawn out, service is about the same. One company has image, which is a much higher, better image. The other one, not unusually, has a higher quality range, and they have a higher price range. And so you look at this and you might say, well, gee, the guy who's got more real estate is going to win. And if you thought that, you'd be right, because given that the image is much higher, the quality is much higher, and service about the same, people will pay a little bit more for that. And if they don't, then you've got kind of an inverse relationship potentially. But now you can actually focus on what the issues are and you can really make some corrections to that. There's a lot more to be said about this, but I just wanted to put this in your mind as part of the way that you can look at, assess, and make changes within your market niche to get better and better. So you want to define your crack in the market. You want to create value for your customers by using both market positioning and market emplacement. We're going to talk about planning much more another time, but the reason that we're starting or having this conversation is because within this planning marketing cycle that has been developed over about 30 years, the customer profile and analysis, competitive analysis, market research, all of these first things are what you do to get ready to do market positioning. And market positioning is the last thing that you do before you begin your campaign planning. You do your branding after you do your marketing positioning, and then you start to market. So you see, about half of the work is you haven't even thought about what you're going to advertise, how you're going to advertise it, what media you're going to use. You really haven't done much until the marketing positioning is complete. So here's the proverbial sort of crack in the market. And this is kind of an illustration. It's the illustration I used on my book of the same name. And what it illustrates is that when a market starts out, it's in one of these little streams, new development of a new product. But as it gains momentum and joins into other markets, and the market gets bigger and bigger, it widens out. And as it gets wider and wider, business gets tougher and tougher with more and more competitors. And you remember when we looked last meeting at market types, when you have this rapid growth period on the S curve, that's when people begin entering the market. After the market is understood and consumers know what you're talking about, and you get a little notoriety, guess what? Your competitors figure that out too. And then they start to join into the competition, and now you've got a much bigger river, a much bigger canyon to try and fill up. It's harder to do. If you stay in these little teeny cracks, you can hide in there. In the water, as all the competitors rush by, and you're still just in here doing your thing. And unless you grow rapidly, you won't be able to keep control of that. And so that's an important issue. So here's one way. I'm going to present to you several ways. Because of this concept is so important, I want to present it to you in several ways. And partially what positioning is understanding some elements here, these three basic elements: who your competition is, what you can do, what your competencies are, or what are you good at, really good at, and who your customers are. So with these three things, you can say, okay, well, where do we fit? And what really happens is you can say, okay, this is what we can do. Here are our core competencies, but we've got competitors, maybe an individual competitor, that can do this much of it. So we're going to be competing with him or her right there. And not all customers are our customers, but the ones who want what we want will be, the ones in here or the ones over here, because your competition has some of these competencies as well. But when you put the whole thing together, what you end up with is you can find out that this section right here, this is really where you shine. This is where your niche is, in a way, or your positioning should be. Because you don't want to be everything to everybody. You want to be something specific to somebody. And that ends up, and if you want to stay away from your competitors, you can end up being down in here, and this is where you want to grow your business. It's where you want to increase your specialization. It's where you want to innovate your products. It's kind of how you go about that. So that's another way to look at it. This also has to do with emplacement, by the way. And emplacement is more of the geographic approach. If you happen to be a retail store, that's easy to understand. The most important thing is location, location, location in retail. And if you have a bad location, you're going to have a smaller market. You're going to have to fight hard to get people to drive across town. You're going to have to, even if your competition has a corner location and you're down the street somewhere, you may not believe it, but man, they have a better opportunity because their exposure is higher. I've had retail stores with competitors like that, and that's a hard lesson to learn. Even to have a better operation, better store, better service, better everything. If you don't have that location, it's really difficult to compete. And we had to learn new ways and be different enough so that the guy in the corner didn't have what we had, so we could really attract people, because people would have to simply walk a half a block down in order to look at it. And so, it's a dramatic effect, and it's very important. Many small businesses and starting businesses just don't think about the importance of each of these issues, and then they end up wondering why they're having trouble getting business. Now, this is another way of thinking about market emplacement. It's kind of like protecting your customers in a way so that your competitors can't see them. So in this particular example, here's your competitor over here. Here are your customers over here. If you have a pretty narrow niche and you can get close to them, say, have a strong relationship, you can actually prevent your competition, all of these potential customers or competitors, from seeing your customers. In my particular business, where it's mostly relationship, or was mostly relationship driven, I didn't have much competition from other consultants, because I was so close to my clients, they wouldn't even open the door for another consultant. They were just too happy. They weren't going to go through the pain, the investigation, the research it takes to find and hire another consultant, plus the whole issue of making a comparison. The only way I'm going to get fired is by doing a bad job. And so, from that perspective, my clients were completely blind to all these other consultants. And that can happen in lots of other businesses as well. They just don't see anybody else. Amazon has developed this kind of a relationship. They have made it so easy to simply go on Amazon, check in, type in a few words, find what you want, and you just click a button and it is there tomorrow. That is really hard to compete with. So after a customer tries to go online and checks this out and checks that out, pretty soon they find it's not as reliable. I just rebought the same thing, just came this morning. It just happened to be a little storage unit for my yard. And I found one online for $60, never showed up. The company, as I investigated, and I knew this, I've done enough of this to where, I knew there was a risk. I think I paid $160 to Amazon in order to get the second one. Same exact product as far as I can tell. The first ones actually were scammers, I believe. They had a different name from the product. It was kind of hard, they were very skillful. I was almost drawn in because I wanted to see how good they were at ripping me off. And they were pretty good, because as you go through the process of the sale, you're seeing and hearing everything you want to see and hear. The price is right, we got this, we got that. But as you're going through there, you're having a hard time figuring out, okay, well, exactly who is the company? Yes, there's a name on there. But then the email comes from a different company. And so it's somebody selling somebody else's inventory from some other person. Who knows, maybe this thing will show up, but I'm going to say it won't show up. So what can I do? All I can really do is go to my credit card company and say, this never showed up, I'm not going to pay the bill, which is what you should do. So there was a case where I'm going right back to Amazon, because you know what? It was too much of a pain to try and save. In this case, it was a lot of money. It was less than half. But to try and save the money, I ended up wasting a lot of time and effort and had to wait longer to get it. Why not just go to the one that you trust? That's what Amazon has done. As much as I try not to do business with Amazon, I find it very difficult not to do business with Amazon. So take this to another example. Let's say that the company that moves a little further apart and they don't quite have that relationship, they don't have that symbiotic circumstance. They have to be way bigger, 3 or 4 times larger, in order to be able to protect their customers from the competitors. So there's kind of an example of how the perspective can change things. Excuse me. Then the same kind of thing happens in reverse. The other company can do the same thing to you, and you can't see them. So, the idea here, the concept here is the closer you are, the more you cover your customers by taking care of them, the harder it is for your competitors to be able to break them free. Now, of course, each industry is different, and the amount of competition has a lot to do with it. So the emplacement is sort of the physical placement within a defined crack. And then positioning is selecting the appropriate differentiators to plant the brand in the mind, and maneuvering intentionally to keep competition away from customers is really the whole purpose of trying to be able to create this. Now, one other mention, just for those of you who might be wondering, business to business is a different situation than business to consumer. And in a business to business circumstance, you need to understand where your business is coming from as the business and who your business customers are, understanding where your profit comes from, and understanding the profile of the decision makers. Now, this sounds kind of interesting and simple, of course. No, but it's a lot harder than it looks. You really need to be able to have good enough numbers to be able to tell what your margin is and your sales volume on every customer you have. Now, this can be done with modern technology because it's easy to be able to put them into effectively a cash register approach or your accounting system, and be sure to set it up so that you have you can attach your customer to each order and each inventory item so that you can generate and create the reports that really helps you get to where you need to be in terms of the analysis. But you need to understand, in order for you to have continue relationships, you need to know what their rate of growth is, whether or not they're going to pull back, what the economy is doing, and what their margin is, so that you can understand the strength of how much price pressure you should allow to be put on you, how to negotiate better prices, and that whole thing. That whole issue is one type of analysis. But then the consumer, business to consumer, B2C, is a little different. You have to really understand demographics, psychographics, and cohort groups. This is an example here of one of the systems that is out there. And to kind of just illustrate this in a very brief way, consumers can fit in all of these different parameters. And so if you take a look at retirement on the top, and then you go straight down, these are people who are still working, wage earners on the bottom. So they go from top to bottom, bottom to top. Same thing from the side. You're talking about homeowners on one side and renters on the other side. Fundamentally, little different kinds of people. And then you've got a similar thing going across. So from singles to families, way different kind of purchasing behavior between the two. And then you've got high income, and of course that corresponds with low income. Then you have from urban to rural, and then multicultural to America Heartland. And of course, American Heartland is just more the traditional, quote, American kind of ethos. Multicultural really has to do with cultural items that groups of people have that change their behavior. Now, this is not to say, and we certainly don't want to indicate, that if you fit into one of these categories that your behavior is very much always the same, because it is not. And if you fit into one of these categories, it doesn't mean that, like, if you happen to be a K04 down here. It doesn't mean that you have a particular cultural culture. It means that you're going to have some predisposition towards some other types of cultures, perhaps. But it doesn't mean that you're not going to buy hamburgers, and it doesn't mean that you're not going to do most of the activities the same way as somebody who happens to be over here, for instance. But the quantity may be substantially different. You may be, because this tends to be a little bit more on the low income side. You're not going to have them buying the same cars as these people up here on the high income side, for instance. And so you've got all of these different major groups, which you can tell by color, and then minor groups. And all of those things have to be understood. Now, what's the relevance here? The relevance is that a given company will be subject, all companies will be subject to the Pareto principle. In other words, 20% of your business will be, let me restate this, 80% of your business will be generated by 20% of your customers. And sometimes 90% can be driven by 10%. But that basic relationship holds. And so when you say, okay, who are my customers? And you go through the process of investigating these 64 various customer types. It could be between 55 and 65 types based on the 3 different companies that do this. That when that happens, you're going to find that these buying patterns are incredibly similar. And so one company would find that they are getting 80% of their business from not 80% of these, but only 20% of these categories. And they may be, say, right here, some A's, some B's, or they may be down in here. If you happen to be in a business that is primarily dealing with single people, you're going to have very small families, singles, divorced folks, groups of people that are different here. Over here, because these are families, these end up being high income, dual families, and highly educated. Not that singles are not highly educated, but they're only going to have roughly half or maybe a little bit less of the income that this particular family does. So there are differences there. And the point is that, you're going to have some business here, but 80% of your business may be from up here. Now, it doesn't mean you ignore all these other different kinds of people, perhaps a reasonably low income retired person, even family up here. You're going to have some customers like that, but they won't be generating 80% of your business, only a small fraction. So understanding that relationship and who they are is really key. Now, what does this have to do with positioning? Well, what it has to do is that your place in the market is also determined by your customers. That's a very important part of positioning. You're going to use different language for certain customers than you would for other customers if you could. If you do an ad, you're probably going to have to try and find the best language for 2 or 3 customer types. But if most of your customers are all up clustered in the same place, you're going to find it a lot easier to be able to communicate with them. You may communicate with 2 or 3 different little groups, and you're going to do it in a different way with different media. You're not going to do huge broadcast media to everybody all the time, unless you have a huge, not a niche, but a huge market. A big company can do broad advertising. A little company can't and shouldn't, because they don't have a broad audience. So don't forget about competency. Let's always remember that you need to focus on what your customers pay you for, not what you think you do, and how your customers compare your value against your competition. So competency is a fairly easy sort of thing to understand, but you have to remember that your competency is innate in the company, but it also needs to develop based on where you're going. Okay, so I'm going to I'm going to go through, kind of open it up now to discussion for our group today. And I wanted to kind of do so by just having some fun, just to see if you guys could recognize some of these companies that are positioned. So we're talking about an electric car, a high end of the market, well-styled, very high tech. Who do you think we could be talking about there?
Tesla?
I'm sorry, John?
Tesla?
Absolutely, that's Tesla. It's like, who else could it be? You know? Now, we've got a couple of other new companies coming online, but you don't think of them automatically because they haven't even produced a car yet. And then you've got a bunch of other electric cars that fit in, but you wouldn't really call them well-styled necessarily. Some of them will be fine, but you wouldn't call them high into the market. And so, yeah, so those are some of the characteristics, some of the differentiators for Tesla. What about comfortable environment, great coffee drinks, European feel, innovative product design, and they've always got the best location on the street.
Probably Starbucks.
Starbucks, right? Now they've tripped occasionally, and not every store they have is on the best corner location, but by and large, they are in pretty top locations, and you can kind of tell. And they are very sophisticated traffic models so that they know how many people are going to be in the drive-through. They have they're pretty good for customers who really come a lot. They're pretty good at knowing their customers. They ask the name so they can put your name on there. I had an experience where a friend drove me through Starbucks and he told them what he wanted. And it was so unusual. They said, "Oh, hi, John." And he's going, "Oh, is this, so-and-so? Oh, no, it's so-and-so." And then, on the side, you hear her pike up, "Oh, I'm here too, John. How are you doing today?" I mean, they knew who he was because of his order. So, yeah, so it's pretty straightforward. It's like, well, that's Starbucks. How about quality, low price? It's a razor just for men. It's mail order only. And they have an automatic shipping option. Anybody think of who that might be? That's a Dollar Shave Club. Exactly. Now, why would you think about that? I mean, there used to be, 3 or 4 shavers. And then all of a sudden you had 2 or 3 of these guys just show up. And why? Well, because they realized that, there was not a monopoly, but there was an ogala, I was trying to say, agapoly, several, just a few large companies, Schick and Gillette, et cetera, and a couple of others that really controlled the marketplace. And they had kind of, over the years, taken that business over and they really control it. And the prices were just absolutely absurd, if you happen to recall that. Well, that was pretty simple for somebody to come along and say, "This is crazy. I mean, I should be able to get a razor for $1." And, so they developed that and it really went pretty well. They grew very, very rapidly. And so all they did was they simply tried to change the paradigm of the industry. And they did so on a product that is about as basic as a Bic pen. So, I mean, things can be done. There are cracks in markets that are not filled yet. And that's a case where they found one. Cutting edge technology, a phone, immaculate design, thousands of apps. Apple. It could be 2, but Apple would be the one you'd think
Apple
of first.
takes it.
The iPhone, it takes the cake. Now, I am a Samsung believer. Consumer Reports has actually outrated by a point or 2 Samsung over the last 2 or 3 years. So Samsung is an equally quality phone. I don't think the design is bad, but there are those who have developed this Apple relationship over the years, and it's just like the iPhone, the Apple computers. That is just all they deal with. And I mean, they're the biggest because they're the best in a lot of ways. And they do so. And then you say, well, gee, Ron, that's not a niche. No, it's not a niche. But remember, they started in a very small crack. They just happened to keep up with the growth in the industry. And you can go back, we've talked about this before, but I mean, they really developed their very first crack when they built the first, from a kit, they built it and shipped it to you complete, and there was a personal computer, and they continued to do that through the Macintosh and several other products over the years. They've always been cutting edge design, and they have managed in many cases to fill the niche. They didn't do that in computers. They were unable to keep up with all the computer people, although they still are in business and they still have a specialized niche in that business. Okay, you won't be able to come up with this, but maybe an example. This isn't a specific company or brand that you would know. Very few geographic competitors, a high level of skill required, custom work. Now, there are a lot of companies that fit that. And we talked about one the other day, a machine shop that makes things to order, and they have good quality. They turn it around in a reasonable time. There aren't very many of them left. And so they can continue to just exist, but that's a niche.
There's a low-end version of that, Ron. It kind of fits a little bit, and that's Service Master. And if you know that industry a little bit, those guys, I mean, it's pretty basic stuff, but their niche is they've got a reliable relationship with insurance companies. So they get big checks for fixing the problem, and if they don't fix it quite right, they'll go back and fix it again. I mean,
right. And they've got a symbiotic relationship with many of those insurance companies, which is quite
deep. It is dirty work, and there's not too many people who compete. Local guys pop up, but that's all it is. There's nobody nationwide that does Service Master work, and it's not really that sophisticated.
No, you're right, but they're the only ones nationwide. I wasn't aware of that.
Are you talking about the company Service Master?
Service Master. They do restoration repair.
Yeah, I have a member in BNI that does that.
Yeah, the company nationwide, I got a friend of mine who's on the board of directors of one of their sister companies, and it's like 60,000 franchises, and they are absolutely incredibly successsul at putting this brand down to local people who have a couple of trucks and some air hoses.
Yeah. And they've done that by operationally standardizing everything and creating the systems so that
and they back it up. I think the bottom line is that, you know, the guy locally in Utah might not be the best deal, but you're going to get the job taken care of. It's going to get done well.
Yeah, that's right. That is right. So, and that's another great example. And there are dozens and dozens of those, just as there are for the next one. Dirty jobs, few competitors. You must do issues, things that you have to do. High capital needs sometimes. It's like more money than a small guy could come up with in order to get into the business. Christian, one of our regulars, has a business like that. He doesn't happen to be here today, but he has a business that's very much like that. You know, it requires a big truck. You know, maybe a $80,000, $100,000 kind of capital investment, and you're not going to have just anybody come along and be able to pull that away.
Yeah, I think it's pushing quarter of $1 million. Like the equipment needed to pull off their jobs. It's pretty good equipment.
Yeah. And then we've got the high design, trendy, younger audience and early adopters. And that really describes most of what's in the fashion industry. It includes a lot of other things like jewelry and personal care and that sort of thing. John Paul, you know, you're moving into a business that may be fitting into that. That's an area that, just like all the rest, really needs to be honed down. The differentiators many times there come mostly from branding. And so that's a little different. I wanted to throw that in just so that we could talk about it, is that Many times there's very little difference between one item and another. A nice suit that I haven't been suit shopping in a long time, it might be irrelevant today, but a nice suit used to cost $350, $400. You can also buy one for $1,200, $1,300, or a Hugo Boss or more, or Polo. I mean, so there are a lot of companies that sell better suits. The issue, however, is that at some point you can't really buy much more quality because all of the so many stitches per inch, the thread count, all of the quality issues have been covered at the $400 level. You can't get much better, but you can switch from I don't know, plastic buttons to alabaster buttons. Fit and finish end up becoming a big deal. And then of course the brand, and it's like, well, what does it really look like? So the styling ends up being the differentiator. And the styling is very, very important in fashion and jewelry and so forth. But for the most part, that is really built in the mind of the customer. That's why positioning is so critical, is because that's the differentiator. It may not be quality service, but it might be differentiated because the price is very high. And amazingly, prices are high many times because they've created an image that supports that price. And we've talked about, in pricing theory, we've talked about prices that are too low based on what the image is. So it's really possible that you've got a sort of a high level image and the price is too low and people don't believe it. You lose authenticity somehow when all of this doesn't work together. And so I hope that this has kind of helped you understand a little bit deeper what positioning is and what it means. Now, that doesn't mean it's easy to figure out how to do the positioning. I find it is a combination of being realistic and rational. And it also includes a whole lot of the softer side of the skills that you could almost call emotional or psychological, because you have to get into the head of the customer in order to be able to understand what they're going to think of your particular product sometimes. And then that's a very interesting process, because you have to create that image in their mind, and then it has to stay there. And once it's there, you have to maintain it. So it's kind of a cyclical thing that cycles through, I suppose you could say. And you can't do anything to destroy that. I mean, if you have a high quality product and you buy two of them that have terrible quality, you're going to have a very difficult time re-embedding that high quality image in somebody's head. So you can destroy a high image product very, very easily and quickly. And so you have to be very protective of that. And I think that's true with some of these other characteristics. But I wanted to take a few minutes here and just kind of open it up and share any problems you've had, marketing, positioning problems you've had, experiences that you've had, solutions that you see, or any questions you have about, well, kind of how to go about doing this.
So I've got a question for John and for Edgar. And
Good.
this is a reflection also to myself. I go back, I've had a couple of companies, and how do I know where I am positioned? I think I have the highest quality of this. I think I have whatever it is. I've got my own perception of what it is that I think I'm doing. But the reality it is, as I found out over time, what I think I'm providing really doesn't matter. And so at some point, we've got to connect with what your client base thinks. I mean, and that, to me, that's the most When you come to positioning, you can be a Chevrolet dealer and come out and say that you've got the most authentically fast supercars of the world. Well, okay, if you're talking about the Corvette, you may be onto something. If you're talking about the Chevy Nova, you got a problem. So my question is, how do you guys know where you are? How do I know where I am?
That's a very difficult way to look into it.
Yeah.
One thing that Ron pointed out is the ability, the B2B. And I think one thing that pointed out is identifying the decision maker. And so that stood out to me a lot, because that's kind of what I've been doing for the last 2 years on the B2B, is almost building a profile on, the echo. Ron, do you want to mute the mute yours and see if it doesn't do the echo? Does that work better? Okay, sorry, we're technical difficulties. I'll figure this out, I promise. So the one thing that I got from Ron's presentation was the B2B identifying the decision maker. And I think for the last 2 years, I think what I found the niche made me realize is that I think I found the niche on how to identify the decision maker, not necessarily the product. Because a million people have the products into restaurants, they knock on the door, they drop out a flyer, and that flyer ends up in the trash, or they have like guards to bury to defend the owners from talking to anybody. So that's kind of where I think the thing for our company was identifying the decision maker, building a profile about him, and how to be able to provide some sort of value, and to the point where they want to talk to us. So how do I identify if I'm the best at that? I think I don't know yet if that's my product I'm selling. I think that's really what it is. But the fact that it takes very little tries for them to talk to us is probably the reason why I measure that maybe I'm the one that figured this out on our niche market. I don't know if that kind of helps. And John.
It's a lot to take in, and frankly, I'm still thinking about it. And I mean, it's one thing that I circled from our last meeting is how to develop sort of an open channel of feedback. That, I mean, I have a very particular idea of, I mean, it's a valid point. I have a very particular idea of what I'm selling, and part of what I'm selling is highly experiential. And so I've tried to design my products and my layout so that it's not just a product, but it's a sensory experience. Oftentimes it's triggered with a memory or a desire to experience something that is not so common anymore, that there's a rarity to it. And we work with very specific sets of wholesalers. I'm almost entirely wholesale. I do not do retail. And I mean, actually, what spoke to me in today's talks was being defensive about your customers. I find that I can operate relatively anonymously within sort of a space that, there are a lot of people who say make craft personal care products. If I'm going to all these, makers markets and shows, everybody's going to know what I'm selling. They can copy me. But if I'm just available through highly curated, high quality wholesalers that are strategically picked, I can operate anonymously, more or less. And these retail outlets often have maybe a museum component to them. And what they're trying to do is educate, inform, provide something that's unique. And what's been a struggle for museum stores and things of that nature is that the space has become more and more commoditized recently, and they've been sort of assaulted during COVID. So the idea is to offer something unique, offer an experience, maybe someone learns something about something. And I mean, I think that's what I'm offering. And I feel like that profile has been successful, but I take the point. I'm not sure what exactly it is my customer sees yet that they find enticing about my product. Oftentimes, though, I do find that in talking with the decision maker, it is kind of the experience that gravitates to people. So like if it's the fragrance of a certain product that they really like and they reorder, you know, I've had a couple buyers be like, hang on a second, I just have to open this and smell it one more time. My wife and I bought this and took it home. So, I mean, it's kind of fun to see them become customers themselves. So that's one thing I've noticed, but I haven't really studied it in any academic way.
So it is interesting because I'm wondering, you know, if you know really what the customer is really appreciating about the product that you are offering, you may be able to read between the lines and help analyze what would make it more enticing to him or her, as the case may be. And in a way, you're actually serving her well or him well by trying to understand what their core desires are. Of course, it's a problem if what you're trying to supply is actually what they don't need. Sure. And I'll give you a really easy example. I had a friend of mine was into racing cars. And, you know, I was oblivious to the fact that when you have a high performance engine, back in the day, you go out and you have to buy specialty fuel that you cannot buy from local dealers. You have a guy who has a blend, and it's racing fuel. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's a tank with a pump, and you give him so much a gallon. It's really a commodity, but you're going over and you're giving him a lot more money for a hopefully more refined product. And that's a completely different business than the guy at the corner mart who they don't care what fuel they're buying. They just want a gallon of go juice. Yep. And, you know, if they can take it for 2 cents less, then that's their business.
So much the better.
Now, you better not try to solve one of your clients' problems. You've only got one group of clients. And so I guess to know who your client or customer is, and then to try to at least address that, I don't know. I just find it a real challenge for me. I'm always thinking, okay, am I doing something that I like, or is it really something that my client base likes?
I think that one of the biggest issues when it came to me is trying to figure it out. I was like, oh, I'm building something I think it's going to work for the customer. And I figured that out about 30 days in after I went out and tried to sell it, that I wasn't sure if it was the product was not good enough or the placement was not good enough. So I never really understood the difference. If it was me having the issue that I'm not explaining how this is going to solve problems, or I'm not listening to the customer that the problem I'm trying to solve is not a problem they need. And so finding that balance, I think the only way I found it was by actually finally getting a customer that took the risk on me and realized that that was not what they needed. And what I was giving them was not really something either I could provide to them, or his intent was, even though this is what I want, if I follow their lead, at the end of it all, it was going to be a disaster, because they want everything that doesn't matter. It's almost like throwing mud at the wall and whatever hits. So what they're really asking me for was a product that they can actually measure, that it can actually see if it's being productive, but they never asked me for that. That's kind of what I had to assume that they needed, based on finally me not providing what I thought they needed, actually listening and almost like filtering their words and trying to figure out what they wanted was not exactly what they were telling me. So just because words were coming out of the mouth, I don't think that was the intent of what they really wanted. And so that was
in the middle of all of this, maybe the customer you're providing a service to is not really the customer who you're going to end up with. Maybe there's 2 customers out there. And maybe in providing to one customer, you lost the other. We had a product, I was in technology development and engineering, and we had a client called Hillenbrand. And Hillenbrand is one of the world's leaders in hospital information systems and media. They do from the womb to the tomb. And their biggest problem, because we would go and say, look, tell me what your biggest problem is, and let us see if we can find a solution to that biggest problem from a technology point of view. And they said, well, our biggest problem is bed sores. We have more lawsuits involved, not with us personally, but with our hospitals, with bed sores. Bed sores are a really big issue. If we could help solve the bed sore issue, I think we'd be able to get away from litigation and payments and all kinds. So we went about and designed a sheet, a disposable sheet with sensors on it that would give beep, 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 beep when water was dropped on it, when urine was on it, and it could even differentiate things. We were excited about it. So were the managers at Hillenbrand. And so we went into trials and the whole thing flopped. And it flopped terribly. Now, do you know why it flopped? Here we are in the middle, going into hospitals and testing out these things. They're phenomenal. Very, the nurses didn't want anything to do with them. If you think we're going to be responding to your beeper every time, I said, look, we've got enough to do. We had completely forgotten about one of the major customers. And one of the major customers were the health professionals who actually had to deal with the problem.
Yeah.
The top end guys wanted to solve their financial problem. We wanted to go out and be a winner and have technology. But the guys in the field said, not me, go away.
Right. Well, I think what you've each said is really, they're all good examples of why this is hard. And while it's the most important, it is also one of the hardest things to do. And I think the answer to part of it is that you have to have a combination of responses. You need to talk to people as much as possible. And those can be done in focus groups or we're trying to sell something. So, at first, whoever's doing the selling is going to be your primary feedback person. But then as you develop customers, you switch into other feedback systems that you build formally that include, customer service feedback, answering the phone, recording what the people are calling about. These are things nobody likes to do, but they're all really important. Doing formal surveys, which are easier to do today than ever before on SurveyMonkey and other similar systems that are very inexpensive, if not free. So if you can figure out how to get your customers to give you feedback, and you can do that through a variety of mechanisms. By that I mean emotionally, or taking the time to do it by giving them a bonus or some sort of reward. You'll find that you'll get enough feedback that you'll realize you've made a mistake here, you were right about this, you were wrong about that. And so this positioning never really stops. It is an ongoing kind of process. And so when you put a product out there, you're hoping that you selected the right target market, that you've got all the right attributes, you've differentiated yourself, that you're going to be able to support it through service. You're hoping you're going to do all these things because your customer is A5, whatever you want to call that customer type. And then you find out, down the road, no, we were a little bit wrong about that. And in your case, John, that wasn't even our customer. Our customer needs to be the nurse, so you do that through a variety of ways. You went through trials, you found out. You didn't start producing them, you see. And I think that's part of the key thing here is you don't just jump into it until you find out. When the dairy, one of my clients wants to develop a new product, we have developed a very strict regime on how to do that. It has to do with flavoring and so forth. And so the product manager starts by developing something that they like, and then it spreads out to a group of about 15 or 20 in the company, and they go through and they do their best test, and then they vote on what they think is better. Then they narrow it down to 2 or 3. And then the next thing that happens is that we select a very small group of customers, give them the free product. The idea is, we'd like you to try something. We're going to tell you about what we're doing. We want your opinion about the taste, if you'll promise to fill out the survey we're going to send next week. And so we send out a whole bunch of quarts of a particular product. You get 3 or 4 or 5 or 600 people on that. And it doesn't have to be big. It can be a small sample. And you get the feedback and you find out, wow, this is too sweet. Or it's got too much caffeine in it. Or it has not enough coffee taste to latte taste, or whatever the product is. And then you go, okay, let's go back to the drawing board, and then you begin on your next one. Well, sometimes we've done that as many as 3 times before the product is ready to go out. So that can take 3 to 6 months. So, that's product development process that works really well if you have enough people to participate and you have enough customers to give you feedback. When you're brand new and starting, that's a whole different thing. You got to use your friends. You have to keep in mind, does my friend really fit in this category? Is this really who it is? You know, you're developing a logo. You don't want to ask me if your target market is a 25-year-old female. You know, I'm going to give you an intellectual feedback from experience that might have some value, but as a regular old white guy, I'm not going to be very valuable to you. So the 20-year-old female is going to be a lot more valuable to the feedback than I would. And so that's why it's so important to get some of that feedback before you just jump into production or capital investment, and tweak it so that you can get it as good as possible. Now, if you can stay in business, this becomes something that is actually fairly easy to do. But you have to have the discipline to be able to go through the process and make sure that that feedback is going to be consistent and useful. For companies that I've worked with for a long time, we've had a long series of general customer service questionnaires, and then we compare one period to another. It might be every year, every 2 years, every 3 years, and we compare those to see if we're increasing or decreasing on, say, those service areas. How fast do we answer the phone? How friendly are our people? Are the products still a quality that you expect? A variety of questions like that. And then you use those trends to determine whether or not you're on the right track or the wrong track. That becomes an operational thing. And so now you're literally positioning your company very slowly based on the more information that you learn. And then as the market changes, guess what? You're already there. You're changing with the market. You know, don't ever think you're going to develop a product and it will be just right. It's never just right. The customer gets to say that. You don't. Your job is to get the customer and innovate. Remember, that's what Drucker has told us. Get the customer and innovate. There's no other reason you're in business. So that's what you do. And part of that innovation is to learn what you have to improve and to continually do it. So, well, I think we've used up our time, and this has been a terrific session, I think, because of your participation and your questions. This is a subject that we'll continue at least one more time, because we want to go through examples. We want to kind of push the envelope a little bit, and it might actually feel like we are overdoing it a little bit. But this is so important that the better that you understand how to go through this positioning, literally, the more successful you'll be. And so we will see everybody at the next meeting. Thank you all so much for participating today.
Thank you, Ron and John.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.